Be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone, but if someone puts his hand to you, send him to the cemetery. Also, another quote that Malcolm X states in one of his other speeches is, if they're nonviolent to you, then we'll be nonviolent to them. However, if they show violence to you, we will retaliate in violence. This is Malcolm X's mindset through the civil rights movement, and this shows that Malcolm X expects that violence is the only effective tool for social change when nonviolence is not the key. Malcolm X started a rally more hardened of the New York members to go to Los Angeles for direct action against the police. This shows how Malcolm X was a good leader in the civil rights movement, and once again shows how violence was the effective tool for social change.
We were aware of the fact that death walks hand in hand with struggle. This is a quote from Stokely Carmichael, who was once the chairman of a nonviolent group, the SNCC. Upon realizing that violence was an ineffective tool for social change, Stokely turned the SNCC radical and began living by the motto, Black Power.
Then on the second day of the student demonstrations, things turned violent. Police turned high-pressure fire hoses on the young people and set attack dogs on them. Birmingham civil rights leader Reverend Calvin Woods was there.
There had been some dog biting, some beating, some killing. Many people were beaten and spit on and put in jail, lost jobs. But those were minor things compared to what we felt we had to do.
The brutal crackdown was widely televised, and images of the event were seen around the world. Robert Corley says this incident galvanized new support for the civil rights movement.
It was really that children's crusade that really turned the tide, because it did serve the goal of filling up the jails and forcing the white community to come to the table with King and negotiate some sort of settlement.
Eventually, King and Birmingham city leaders reached an agreement. Within months, the local segregation laws were abolished. Reverend Woods says King's determination to keep the movement going made all the difference.
We would not have accomplished what we did if it had not been for the support and leadership that Dr. King brought.
The Birmingham campaign was a climactic battle of the civil rights movement. For many, it stands as an iconic symbol of the sacrifices made by King and thousands of African Americans. Chris Simpkins, VOA News, Birmingham, Alabama.
So Zach, after the video, what are your thoughts?
Well, Mason, it is clear that the brutality of the police was a result of the retaliation from the black community, and the retaliation from the black community in these protests caused many of the protesters to be thrown in jail, and this in turn caused a lot more support for the black community in the protests, while also forcing the police to sit down with King and come to a compromise on the segregation in Alabama. And this led to many of the segregation laws that were put in place to be abolished. So in a way, violence indirectly was an effective tool for social change, because the violence during the protests from the police and the protesters forced a non-violent compromise with King and the police. The Black Panthers were another violent protest group. It says here that the Black Panthers started with the violent protests because the insurgent civil rights practices proved incapable of redressing these conditions, and the organizations that led much of the nonviolent disobedience, such as SNCC and CORE, went into decline. So it shows here that nonviolence was not working and that it was not an effective tool in addressing the problems of segregation, and it was not bringing about social change. So the Black Panthers were a violent group started for the specific reason of bringing about social change, and it did just that. And one of the major leaders of the Black Panthers was Malcolm X himself.
I went down to the demonstration to get my fair share of abuse, singing we're gonna vent our frustration. If we don't, we're gonna blow a 50 amp fuse. Sing it to me. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, will you just fight fine?